So next up on my ancient DNA matches is, still within the Mesolithic 2, German shaman woman, BDB001, Saxony-Anhalt, Germany. A match 0.16%, apparently genetically closer to this sample than 65.25% of other genome link users. The BDB001 sample is from a woman of the Western hunter-gatherer population who lived sometime in the period of 7060 to 6611 BCE in the late Mesolithic, and whose remains were unearthed at the Bad Durenberg archaeological site near the Saal River, about 20 kilometers from the city of Halle in central Germany. She was buried together with an infant, and her skeleton is almost complete. Kinship with the infant has not been proven. DNA was extracted from a petra skull bone and femur leg bone. Her mitochondrial haplogroup was U4. They were buried in a seated position, covered with heated ochre, and the grave contained several goods, such as raw deer antlers, animal tooth pendants, remains of mammals, birds, and reptiles, and a polished stone adze head. The adult female individual had an anatomical anomaly at the craniovertebral junction that very likely led to abnormal neurological consequences. Some may conclude that she was a shaman. Examination of polymorphisms in genes that determine skin pigmentation all showed ancestral alleles denoting that she had dark skin. However, for eye colour, she had the derived allele suggesting light eye colour. Regarding lactose persistence, she had the ancestral alleles in concordance with previous findings that proved that lactose tolerance evolved during the Bronze Age or even later in Europe. She was heterozygous for the MHC RS2269424 locus that is suggested to protect against microbacterial infection, and heterozygous for the S1229984 in ADH1B gene, where the derivative allele is known to reduce alcohol clearance from the liver. So I did a bit of research because that's all it was showing me there. So here's what I found. The BDB001 sample, widely celebrated as the Shaman of Bad Durenberg, represents one of the most culturally unique, genetically precise, and highly studied archaeological discoveries from European prehistory. The comprehensive factual breakdown of the sample, the individual, and her burial details include genetic profile and physical appearance. Genetic sequencing shows she belonged entirely to the Western hunter-gatherer population. She carried no genetic admixture from later Neolithic Anatolian farmers. This suggests to me this is on my father's side then. Phenotype. Her DNA indicates she possessed a dark skin complexion, straight dark hair, and striking blue eyes. She was roughly 5'1", with a notably slender, gracile build. Unlike most prehistoric hunter-gatherers, her skeleton lacks distinct muscle attachments on her lower extremities, indicating she did not perform heavy, continuous physical labor. The anatomy, health, and shamanistic phenomena. Age and cause of death. She died between 30 and 40 years of age. Her likely cause of death was a severe systemic tooth inflammation. Congenital defect. Anthropologists discovered a structural anomaly at the base of her skull, near the foramen magnum, where the spinal cord passes. Her first cervical vertebrae was incompletely formed, reaching only 40% of its normal arch. Induced trance states. Researchers believe that by tilting her head back into a specific position, this bone defect would restrict blood flow to the brain. This restriction could induce involuntary eye movements, fainting, or altered states of consciousness. It's highly probable that her community viewed this physical anomaly as a gift to traverse into spiritual realms. The double burial and family connection. The infant BDB002, she was buried in a sitting position with an infant aged 68 months placed across her lap or between her legs. The genetic relationship, long assumed to be mother and child, advanced genomic matches revealed they were actually separated by several generations. The infant boy was her fourth or fifth degree descendant, such as great-great-great-grandson. This discovery implies her lineage lived in the exact same region for generations. The grave goods and archaeology. The grave was found accidentally in May 1934 by workmen laying a water pipe in the spa gardens of Bad Dürrenberg. While most local Mesolithic graves contained few or no items, her grave yielded over 140, intricate artifacts. Artifacts including a complex headdress fashioned from raw deer antlers, over 50 pierced animal teeth from oryx, wild boar and deer, crane bones and turtle shells. Microscopic analysis in the late 2025 confirmed the presence of microscopic feather fragments from waterfowl like geese and songbirds, showing she was likely buried in a padded bed of feathers or wearing a feathered garment. The entire grave pit was thoroughly filled with a thick layer of powdered red ochre pigment. Archaeological tracking indicates that local groups continue to revisit her grave pit to leave offerings for centuries after her death, a highly unusual multi-generational reverence for the Mesolithic era even. The skeleton, along with its extensive grave goods and a high-tech 2024 facial reconstruction, is permanently on display at the Hale State Museum of Prehistory in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany. So, further research. If you received an ancient DNA match to the Shaman of Bad Dürrenberg while carrying the maternal haplogroup J1C3, like I do, your connection does not come from a direct maternal line. Instead, your connection is autosomal. Well, that's the test that Genome Link does. So, like I said earlier, it seems to be more from my father's side. Meaning you share tiny overlapping segments of DNA across your numbered chromosomes 1 to 22 that have been passed down through thousands of different ancestral pathways over the last 9,000 years. Your genetic relationship breaks down into two distinct parts. The maternal disconnect. Your mitochondrial DNA tracks your unbroken mothers to mothers line. The shaman's lineage sample BDB001 belonged to the haplogroup U4B1B1. This is a classic Western hunter-gatherer maternal marker that dominated Europe during the Mesolithic. Mine, J1C3, emerged later, roughly around 5250 BCE. It's primarily a Neolithic farmer lineage associated with the expansion of agriculturists moving from the Near East and Anatolia into Europe. Conclusion: you do not share a direct maternal ancestor with her anywhere near her lifetime. Her maternal line U and yours J split apart further back in time, roughly 45,000 years ago, when their parent haplogroups branched off from a common African ancestor. How the ancient DNA match actually works. If your maternal lines are different, how did an ancestry site give you a match? The platform you used performed a process called segment matching or identity by descent, but it's autosomal. So autosomal overlap. Instead of looking at your empty DNA, the software scanned your autosomal DNA, the 99% of your genome inherited from both parents. It found a matching string of genetic letters, SNPs, shared between you and the shaman. The melting pot of Europe. Even though the shaman was 100% Western hunter-gatherer, her people did not completely vanish. When the Neolithic farmers who brought your J1C3 lineage to Europe arrived millennia later, they heavily interbred with the indigenous hunter-gatherers. The result? Modern Europeans are a genetic cocktail of hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and Bronze-Age steppe pastoralists. The shaman's relatives ultimately married into the population that carried your maternal line. You inherited a tiny resilient fragment of her population's DNA through one of your millions of non-maternal ancestry pathways. So I did ask, does that mean I connect through my father's line, not my mother's line? No, not necessarily. You connect to her through any line in your family tree on either your mother's side or your father's side, as long as it is not your strict unbroken maternal line, your mother's mother's mother. Because of how autosomal DNA is inherited, your connection likely comes from a massive web of thousands of different ancestors. Where her DNA is hiding in your tree, because the indigenous West hunter-gatherers eventually interbred with the incoming Neolithic farmers across Europe, her DNA travelled down to you through a mixture of pathways. Your mother's other lines. It could come from your mother's father. Your maternal grandmother's father, or your maternal grandfather's mother. Your father's line. It could come from your paternal grandfather, your paternal grandmother, or any of their ancestors. Ultimately, your mother and your father both carry a mix of hunter-gatherer and early farmer DNA. You inherited a tiny piece of the shaman's DNA simply because it survived the genetic lottery across thousands of generations, passed down through a random combination of both your parents' ancestors. So next on my DNA ancient matches is Mesolithic 2 still, Neolithic French farmer, Pen 001 underscore real 1. Alpes Côte d'Azur, province, France, 0.15% DNA match, genetically closer to this sample than 84.67% of other genome link users.